let's start this thing. I found a quote that I just wanted to share with you guys to sort of contextualize things a little bit further even than they've already been. The police are simply the hired enemies of the black population. They're present to keep the Negro in his place and to protect white business interests, and they have no other function. They are, moreover, even in a country which makes the very grave error of equating ignorance with simplicity, quite stunning ignorant. And since they know they are hated, they are always afraid. One cannot possibly arrive at a more surefire formula for cruelty. Now, that wasn't our Mayor de Blasio making an impassioned plea after the latest non-indictment, or even, President Obama. Certainly wasn't him. It wasn't even Al Sharpton. That was an excerpt taken from James Baldwin in 1966 for a piece that he wrote for The Atlantic in 1966, and the title for that was, it was The Nation, and it was in an article entitled A Report from Occupied Territory. So, as present as that seems and almost prophetic then, I want to open it up with you guys, and we can start with you, Councilmember Cumbo. What have we learned from then until now? Not even from the Baldwin time, but from Rodney King, to right now.
I would say that it's very easy to say that so little has changed from that dynamic, but that's quite obvious. I would say that that quote in many ways speaks to the truth of the matter in its broadest context, but at the same time, I don't want to even spend a lot of time in terms of defending the NYPD, but I don't believe from my interaction, particularly as a city council member, of course, that is the goal and the intent of everyone in that force. There are people that have various views outside of that, but those various views are superseded by a much larger context that's dictating the actions that we're seeing. And so the way that I have viewed it as a council member has been more that the challenges that exist within communities of color are, as the mayor said, they are the result of centuries of racism, of lynchings, of neglect, of inequality. And now we're at this very interesting place where people are at a verge where they're thinking a lot of different things in terms of their viewpoints. But it's one of those things where we're looking at the police department to help us in protecting and serving all communities, but particularly communities of color. The challenge that we face is not that we don't have challenges in our community, and there are a lot of people that are working very hard to resolve those issues, but the challenge is that the police department has become almost an element as problematic as the challenges that we're trying to resolve and address, and even more so. And to add insult to injury, we pay our tax-paying dollars for that injury. So it's one of those things where we need the support of the police department, because these years of neglect and inequality have produced some very challenging situations where people have not been invested in, people have not received the education, the resources, all of the things, the proper family foundations and structures that are needed to create the environments that we all want to live in. But we cannot have a police department who comes in and fears the environment versus protecting and servicing and working with the community.
So that brings me to you, Mr. Bandele, and you, Mr. Vitale. You guys have been on the front lines. We've read all of your outposts from Ferguson and right here at home. So is this, of course, Baldwin was talking about Harlem in 1961. It could have been LA in 91 or Staten Island 2 weeks ago. But where are we in terms of that police relationship between you guys?
Well, I think you started to lay it out very nicely, council member, because the reality is that so many communities face a really horrible dilemma. On the one hand, they bear the brunt of crime and disorder. It's their kids who get shot. It's their nieces and nephews who are burdened with drug problems. It's their communities that you can't sometimes use the parks because of homeless people sleeping there, et cetera. But at the same time, these are the communities that have borne the brunt of overly aggressive, disrespectful, and at times brutal policing. And I think part of this dilemma has been driven by a national, a local dynamic where communities are told the only tool that is available to you to solve your neighborhood problems is more police. Right? We're not
That's right.
told, oh, there's a problem with youth gangs, you can have another community center. There's a problem with drugs, we're going to open a new hospital, a new treatment facility. No, you got a problem, bring us the problem, but the solution to that problem is more police. And so what I've been trying to talk about lately is a rethink of what the appropriate police role should be in these communities to address these very real problems. And I think on so many issues, we should be thinking of the police as the last resort, not the first resort. And I think it's very hard to talk about this sometimes, especially in communities that are highly impacted by crime and drugs, but they need to have a very real public conversation about whether or not the police are really serving a positive function for them. And I think one area in particular that's been such a hot button issue is the area of drugs. And the reality is we've had decades of research show that the role of the police is corrosive and destructive in this area. That we've had a war on drugs now for 30, 40 years, and drugs are cheaper, of higher quality, and more widely available than they've ever been. There's no high school kid in this country who can't get any drug they want, and yet that's pretty much the #1 way that young men of color get introduced to the criminal justice system is through the war on drugs.
You know, I agree, 100%, and I think part of what I would like for us to begin to do is reframe this discussion around the institution of criminal justice versus the relationships that we have with individual law enforcement, because we get really caught up in that. I think the knee-jerk reaction by the city on every level is to increase police presence at community meetings, to increase the police at block parties, all of those things, and I'm not interested in any of that. Unless our communities have the ability to hold the institution accountable, unless the commissioner is afraid of his job because of how we feel, I'm not interested in having a barbecue with Joe the friendly cop. That has no impact, That's that. So I'm really talking about shifting the power dynamics that exist in our community, because that's the only way we're going to really talk about preventing police brutality, misconduct, and murder.
So if we are at a place where we can talk about the institution versus the behavior, let's bring it to a very Brooklyn and New York context and talk about the broken windows theory. If we're looking at broken windows, it was a policing tactic from a bygone era as we sit here in 2014, almost 15. Crime rates have continued to go down across the country, but we're hearkening back to an old way of policing when we might have new problems. Has broken windows, in fact, run its course? This man was choked out and killed on the street of Staten Island for selling cigarettes, which is like a tax crime or a broken windows offense, and he's dead now. Are we applying bad tactics to different times?
No question about it, we are. There's absolutely no question. And I think part of the dynamic is we have the return of the creator of the broken windows policing to come back to New York City after, in fact, his response to the Rodney King uprisings in LA, which was to put these gang injunctions in place, which really was a response to the kind of uprising that the young people themselves had in LA, and people saw the power that these young folks had the ability to manifest, and all of a sudden now you have these laws that now make it a problem for young people to congregate in certain places. And so we're having that same issue now. The police commissioner now in New York City has put in place something called Operation Crew Cut, where he's changing the language. We're not looking at gangs, we're talking about crews now. So in high crime areas where we are, Bed-Stuy, if young people are gathered and congregate in large numbers, around 4 or 5 in certain areas, they're considered to be crews and then subject to be approached, to be targeted by the Operation Crew Cut Task Force and those policing methods. So they're all connected. Again, it still is something that is talking about the criminalization of our communities and nothing to deal with issues around safety of our communities.
Can I just add to that? And I apologize because we have an incredible panel, and I don't want to monopolize the entire conversation. But I just wanted to add with the broken windows theory is that as it was introduced to me, when we looked at MTA after the Bernard Goetz situation, one of the things that the MTA wanted to do is that they wanted to make the trains safer, and they did a survey to find out what people wanted. They wanted clean trains, they wanted them better lit, and the third thing that they wanted, which is ironic, is that people said they wanted art. So that born the MTA for Arts for Transit program. But what we saw is that trains would be taken off the line if there was any graffiti or known as scratch-sheety that was put on the line. It would be clean, brought back to the line within 48 hours. And so the idea of creating an environment that was safer, that was better lit, that had more art, started to bring down a reduction in crime through our MTA system. The MTA system of the 1980s is very different from right now, and that's because they made important structural changes. Now, what we're seeing with the broken windows theory is that the police department are looking at people like Eric Garner, like Akai Gurley, as windows of sorts, or inanimate objects in a way. And these are individuals and people. The idea and the way that I come forward with it is in environments such as NYCHA, that if we change the physical structure so that they're well lit, so that the stairwells are clean and they're well maintained, that they have locks on the front door, that they have remodeled lobbies, that the stairwells and the areas outside are well lit when you come in through the gates. Because if for any of you who are not living in NYCHA, whatever development you have, there is an intercom system. There are often cameras there. And some of them, such as in Clinton Hill and the co-ops, you have to go through a guarded security area in order to get in. Anytime you eliminate all of that and you have no security systems put in place, you're going to create a dangerous environment just by the physical structure. And we saw that with Akai Gurley. He's in a situation where the elevators are not working, the stairwells are not well lit, and it creates this very dangerous structure and a way of how people see their community and their home and their environment, that it's not well kept, that we're not investing in it as a city. And we're saying that these individuals that live here, our people, are not important. So it's important that we change the broken windows theory not to be enforced upon people, put it in an enforcement on the physical environment, create a safer environment for individuals to live in.
Thank you. I want to. So if we talk about the environment, and you said you don't have to live in NYCHA to understand that improvements to those areas can make improvements in the way the community reacts.
Certainly.
So I want to go to our artist now, and just Roger, to speak to you about putting yourself into someone else's place. We weren't all Rodney King, we weren't all in that car, but we certainly can imagine through your lens now.
Well, as I said, I spoke on the stage earlier for about 57 minutes, and I've said, with the assistance of my comrade to my left, just about all that I want to say. But I think that there's a lot more that needs to be said, and not simply by me. I think that the people have spoken this week in New York City. And that has been the most extraordinary piece of performance that has taken place on or off Broadway this week in New York. And I commend those of you who are here, who were there, who are there, who will be there. We walked out of this theater the other night into a Flatbush that was full of people. People who were making their voice heard and who were showing that there is a congregation of very dedicated hearts and minds and bodies who are willing to put all of that on the line, who are able to see through their own personal version of oppression and to reach out to all of those who are oppressed. It was another king who said that we should be able to look beyond our own moment of degradation and to reach out to all of those who are degraded. But I happen to think that the other king, this Rodney King, his speech is one of the great American speeches, and I think that it was worth hearing it in its entirety. And that's what I gave you, with a little remix at the end. And when Rodney King passed Father's Day 2 years ago, I was very moved. And I wanted to know why. And I wanted to know why Rodney King should matter to me, and why, by extension, should Rodney King matter to my potential audience. So the first call I made was to the guy to my left, and I told him I need some bookends. And that's what you heard, some sonic bookends. Thanks, Mark Anthony.
Thank you, Mark Anthony Thompson.
I don't mean to be quiet. When I was invited to this evening, this panel, I was so overwhelmed I did some research because I'm not as knowledgeable as you are in this struggle, and I didn't want to get up here and represent Charles Barkley. So after reading Kenny Smith's letter, I wisely decided to just come and listen. But I am honored to be here and equally moved by people now around the world, not only here in Brooklyn and New York and Los Angeles.
So this takes me to you, Carla. Speaking of those people around the world and leaving this theater, going to Flatbush, joining the mass, who are our next leaders? Who's going to emerge from this? We've heard Sharpton, we've heard the president, we've heard the mayor, but who are the people out there on the street going to turn to next, besides maybe it's each other in our Twitter streams, but where's the leadership coming for this Garner generation, for the Mike Brown generation?
That's a hard question. I think they're turning to each other. I think the young people are turning to each other. I definitely don't think they're turning to Sharpton or they're turning to Jackson, or that's another generation. You know what I mean? And this generation, they're making the road. That's basically it. Definitely you see clergy out front. But again, when I talk to people in St. Louis and Ferguson, they're more interested in what they want to do. But I wanted to, I'm going to spin just a little bit. And I'm real happy to be here because I definitely am a city kid. And when you brought up Broken Windows before, I've been twice, well, once I've been summoned under Broken Windows. I've also been arrested under Broken Windows. And then later as an adult, I was arrested as a journalist covering a protest in the Bronx. My family, I have cousins who are in prison. I have family who've murdered people. I have an uncle who's a cop. And I say all that to say I have a very typical, I think, city family, and that mix is in there. You know, I also have a degree from NYU and the LSE, but I have these people also in my family. And that background is what led me in 2011 to start covering Stop and Frisk. And this is before it became a citywide movement, but to start covering the organization of it that year before. And I want to pivot to what Lumumba brought up, which is what I hope this is going to be about, and this is about accountability and how to keep the pressure on accountability. I had a conversation the other day with an activist out of Oakland, and she's been on police accountability since the 90s. She lost her son, she lost her husband. And I think Lumumba's been on this stuff for about the same time as well. But her thing was that, look, you know, she's really happy with the attention that these murders of unarmed black men are getting. But her point is that this has been going on for a very long time. Even in cities where there are consent decrees, even in places like Cincinnati where everyone talks about their collaborative agreement, and Cincinnati had a very similar murder to the Mike Brown case in 2001. These things still, they don't work unless the public pressure stays on year after year after year. And I'll leave you with this, and what she said was the real story, and I'm beginning to see the media pivot to this a little bit too, is that one of the key blockers of any kind of reform, even when you have a civilian oversight board, is police unions. Mm-hmm. Right? How many newspaper articles do you see about police unions and investigations about their power? So when we talk about police, where it's extremely rare to even indict a police officer, that's just a fact. You can count probably on your hand. But at every step at that process, reform gets blocked, right? So even if you get an officer who's indicted, will they get convicted? Likely not. Even if they get convicted, what are they going to be convicted of? Even if they, if they serve time, maybe it's a year, 2 years, or probation for things like murder. So I just want to make sure that our conversation today focuses a lot on accountability and how that.
Well, let's focus on one segment of that accountability. Yeah, please. You spoke about starting to see the tide turning and young folks looking to other young folks and expressing themselves. There isn't a need for a clear leader that someone can pick up and prop in front of a news camera every night. So what is our timeline then if we're to make a substantive change? 2 weeks from this non-indictment, 6 months from now, a year from this date, where are we to toe the line? We talked about registering people to vote in Ferguson. Mm-hmm. People registered to vote. Not a lot of folks showed up for midterms. So what is our responsibility and where should we be?
I'm going to put you on the spot, and I hope you don't mind. Alex is part of something called PROP, and I think that's a great response to that.
All right, Mr. Vitale.
Well, that's the Police Reform Organizing Project, and it's been around for a few years now, and they gave me a promotion. Now I'm Senior Policy Analyst for that. But seriously, I think that there's an issue of movement building here and what kind of form it's going to take and what the leadership of that movement is going to look like. And PROP has been out on the streets doing petition campaigns through the stop and frisk issues, through the broken windows theory stuff, through these recent horrible killings. But we need lots of groups like that. We need to see the self-organizing. And what's been amazing watching the news this last week is, you're looking at the Twitter feed, and there's like 50 people standing in the middle of I-95 in Providence, Rhode Island. I mean, who organized that? I don't know anyone in Providence, Rhode Island doing they're seeing what other people are doing. They're feeling a sense of power, that there's a moment, that there's a sense of possibility, and they're acting on that. But to get the long-term benefits, it's going to require some level of institutionalization. It can't just be this maelstrom of heartbreak and fury. It has to congeal into something that is capable of holding people's feet to the fire. And I think, one of the things we've learned in the last 2 weeks is that the legal and criminal justice system is not going to reform itself. Mm-hmm. That accountability is not going to come from those institutions. It's going to happen out on the streets. And so whatever we can do to support those efforts, and I've just been filled with pride about the sophistication and the wisdom in a lot of the actions that have happened this last couple weeks.
So I'm going to direct this to Lumumba and to Council Member Cumbo, but I wanted to make you aware that in about 3 minutes, we are going to open this up and make it a true community forum, so you don't have to sit there and wait. There are going to be some folks standing on the side with microphones, so if you do have a question or you'd like to address our panelists or share something with our town, please make your way over. So that's a fair warning there. If anyone has questions, you can make your way over here to a microphone. But for you guys, we've seen our mayor come out very passionately, invoke the image of his son, a young black man who even President Obama said, "Hey, looking at Dante, I see myself at that age." And it was a very passionate plea. And I wonder, moving forward, if we're going to have comprehensive legislation or really change things, if there are going to be personnel changes or legislation. Was this political theater? And if it is, how do we separate political theater from real substantive change and hold people who are accountable to make those changes happen outside of nice words the day that the stuff hits the fan?
There have been more than enough proposals put before the mayor. If he's really concerned about the safety of his son, he has the ability to change that. He has the ability to change that. And he can start with that commissioner of his. If that commissioner believes that the way to provide safety for our community is to put cops like Pantaleo in our streets and to have them chase people who are selling CDs and all these other things in our communities, then you can better believe that Dante is not safe. He has the ability to do that. So this is where, again, I'm trying to make some distinctions between those emotional outcries versus making a very specific set of demands and moving on them in a way that we know will bring forth some kind of change. So he has the ability to do that. There are a number of pieces of legislation that are coming up that he can move on quickly. There are 2 more remaining bills in the Community Safety Act that are coming up. If he's really concerned, those 2 bills would not see any opposition from him.
Which leads us to our council member. I know that Ferguson's police force does not bear a resemblance to New York's, but there's a vacuum of power for folks of color at the top from Banks down, and the Commissioner Bratton is there. I wondered how that legislation is going to go through that. Lumumba, can you look in your crystal ball?
I would say that the challenge that I have is that when we talk about Ferguson and we talk about everything that was lacking in terms of officers of color, those in higher office, those that are judges, elected officials, so on and so forth. The challenge that I have with it is that we have all of that here in New York City, and we got the same outcome. So for me, you know, I feel challenged because I've gone along with, yes, they need to register to vote. Yes, they need to do this. Yes, they need to do that. If they had had all of that, we wouldn't have seen this outcome. But something very clearly is saying, that's a huge contradiction, because we have this same situation here in New York City, and it's very difficult to keep pushing that same agenda if it's not yielding the right result. And I want to say one of the things that's been the most challenging for me is now you do have a mayor who does have an African-American son. You have all of these elected officials, myself included, and many who are holding the title the first ever or the first of. And I think what has happened, which this situation, I pray, allows us to realize this newfound power that we have, so that saying that we are the first is no longer just a hand clap. The fact that you are the first is not just something that we're telling our young people. It's now that we are the first, the dynamics of everything has to change. And I believe that we as elected officials, particularly those of color, but also to your point of leadership and young people, the majority of the council is under the age of 40. There's a strong population under the age of 30. So there are young people there. And I think that we have to realize our true power. And we can no longer continue to think that we're on the outside working inside. We're on the inside now, and we are the majority of Black, Latino, and Asian members in the city council, and we have to utilize that power, and those individuals who believe that their fate, that are white, is tied to our fate, and that moving forward collectively, we have to realize that, because the rules that are in place right now were created by individuals that didn't look like us. So when we talk about what we can't do in the council, what we can't do when we step outside, these were rules that were not created by us. Why can't we? Let's recreate the rules. Let's create the legislation. Let's create what we need to create in order to move and to realize that true power that we hold. And just in closing on that, when I think about those little kids, those 8 and 9-year-olds that walk those picket lines to make sure that we could desegregate our school, who walk through hoses, bulldogs, and all kinds of things, we have to look inside ourselves to say, are we realizing that level of courage, that level of bravery, whose shoulders that we stand on, that we come from? We come from very brave and courageous people all throughout this nation, and we have to tap into that at this time, at this point, and right now.
So as we go to our first question, I just want to follow up and just briefly ask you, just like 1-2 bullet, how can those of a like mind who are here, no matter what their complexion, help you to make that happen?
I would say the most powerful thing that's happening right now are all of these protests, all of these rallies, all of these marches. Like you said, what's happening in Rhode Island, it's just picking up and organizing wherever you are, because it creates for us internally the environment where we can say, if we don't get these things done, this is going to start to move in a direction and in a place that you cannot turn back. So let's get these things that we need passed. Let's get the individuals in place that need to be in place. Let's remove the people that need to be removed. Let's create this. But when you get quiet and you get silent, that's kind of what the infrastructure is looking for. We need your pressure on the outside so that we internally can move what we need to move legislatively, economically, appointments, firings. That can happen as long as this is happening and the media and all eyes of the world are on us.
Okay, we're going to go to you.
So, I mean, on the subject of, putting people in place and hirings and firings, I think one of the most disappointingly silent voices out of this whole entire process has been that of Philip Uri. Where is the NYPD Inspector General, and what should we expect from him? And at this point, the man has been in his position for almost a year. I don't know what his role is. And if you could just illuminate what the NYPD Inspector General is supposed to do in a situation like this, and then also as well, is the City Council going to have a public hearing anytime soon on this issue?
That sounds like a professor question first, and then a council member come back.
It was a legislatively created position.
I'm sure a number of us have something to say. I have met with the Inspector General, and on the one hand, it takes a while to get the office up and running, to hire staff, and he's been trying to do that. But on the other hand, this still sounds like the system policing itself. And the charge, it's somewhat heretical because there was a real movement that pushed to get him put in place, but I've always felt like there were significant structural limitations to that office. And he can help a movement in a way by making information available, by putting the spotlight on some things, but it still requires the constant community pressure to get real changes made.
So a council hearing?
I will say that starting tomorrow, you're going to see some very aggressive actions from the City Council.
Monday, December 8th.
December 8th, yes. We are going to, we have been meeting strategically. There have been a lot of discussions, and we are going to be able to, on Monday, starting Monday, we're having what's known as our stated meeting. And from that time moving forward, we have put situations and things that we're going to roll out as this body in the City Council that I believe is going to have the impact that we're looking for in terms of moving forward. So this has been a lot of discussion, a lot underway, and it's just the beginning, but there's a lot more. So yes, tomorrow, the 8th, you will be hearing more from the City Council in regards to this.
Yeah, share your name and your neighborhood with us.
Yes, hi, my name is Melissa Kornick. I'm an investigative producer, and I've worked at 60 Minutes, Dateline, 2020, all these shows.
What's your
So I'm
question?
looking at this situation now and wondering, how do you move white voters to have more compassion for what's going on? Because when you look at the officers and the police chief and the inspector general and all these other people, they're really building a confidence level or comfortableness amongst the white voters. And I've experienced how they're sort of giggling and smiling and doing these little gestures you've seen on Facebook where they're doing a little neck choke thing, behind a reporter. So what can be done to really sensitize the white voters who vote in the bloc?
Thank you. Just to that end, I got an interesting number. A few hours ago, NBC and Marist released a poll, and I want to share one of the numbers with you. They're all pretty enlightening. You can Google it. But they asked about 1,000 people yesterday, the 4th and 5th. They made phone calls to landlines. So if you got a landline, no one who I know has ever had one of these calls, but they called landlines, and 72% of the public and 79% of whites say they have a, quote, great deal or a fair amount of confidence that police in their community will not use excessive force on suspects. Black people on the other side of the coin said 43% of them feel the same way, that they wouldn't be the victims of excessive force. So I don't know if we should start with the sole white man on the panel.
As a white voter,
Yeah, how do we get your people?
and I have a landline, my wife insisted.
So he's the one they called. How do we make our community care?
I think it's an incredibly important question, and I think, you know, it points to some of the, you know, the tragic aspects of the performance we watch, right? That burning shit up does not lend white voters to come to the rallying support of African Americans, right? Yeah. Not that that is like the strategic objective of doing that, or that there is a strategic objective or whatever.
Yeah.
But what I have been thinking about, and thinking about my own childhood experiences, I was also born in '65, the dignity and power of the civil rights movement did important work in changing the perception of at least some whites about the status of African Americans in the society. And I'm reminded of the incredibly powerful posters of, I believe, sanitation workers that just said, "I am a man." And so it is possibly through struggle that at least some whites may be pulled in a direction of rethinking the position of African Americans in the community.
I'm gonna ask, I'm sure all of you have something to say about that, but Carla, he talked about the "I'm a man" sign, very iconic, but I saw a sign that I'm sure is gonna become iconic that someone was holding in the street that said "Justice for," and there was a line under. And it's like, we're gonna change the name in 2 weeks' time, 6 months' time. So I think that's the sign of our times now. What are you thinking about getting other people involved who may not be black or brown in believing?
Right. So I'm not an activist. I don't get people involved in stuff. This is definitely for people like Lumumba. But to your question, actually, so my next piece is actually about that. So the assumption I get a lot with color lines is that color lines is just for black people or brown people. And actually, I look at our readership. I look who's on Twitter. I look at who's on Facebook, and it's America. I'll just put that out there now, because I get that assumption a lot when I go out to do interviews. People think they're just talking to a black audience, and that is the furthest thing from the truth. In terms of getting whites interested and organized, I mean, there are a couple of things I think are important. First, there was a study that's going around where it talked about social circles of whites are about 92% white, right? This goes back to our history of residential and school segregation. So most whites in this country, most of the people that they know are white, right? If most of the people that you know are white, you definitely are not going to be talking about police brutality, really. So that's number one. Number two, I've been talking to quite a few white activists and what they're doing, and their focus is not working in communities of color. Their focus is working with whites to go back into their own communities to change hearts and minds, right? So, and I haven't seen a lot of coverage, like journalistic coverage of this. I see a lot of this stuff, a lot of this discussion happens online. I think journalism has done a bad job at reporting around race. Reporting, not opinion making. There's a lot of opinion, right? But there's not a lot of reporting. But what I can report back to you, talking to these white activists all over the country, is that for example, in Ferguson, there's at the YWCA, they're bringing in, I think they've expanded the number of witnessing whiteness groups they've had. Those have expanded from, I think, 5 to about 10. People are just really interested and want to know what they can do in their own community. One of the things that activists do is when they're going out to the protests at night, they'll call up this group that's already there. It's like calling up your phone tree. And they put them purposely in the protesters to, they found that having whites in the protests actually makes the police calmer. Right? It makes the police react in a different way. There's a different conversation that's then happening. So that's one way that whites are getting involved. Another way, there's a group called SURGE, Showing Up for Racial Justice. They've been around since about 2008, I think. They came around when Obama first got elected, and then they realized there was like an increase in like hate crimes, or reports of hate crimes, I should say, reports of hate crimes. And basically what they do is, it's a kind of, it's a volunteer group. And it's it's a decentralized kind of group. It's national, and basically it's place-based activism. So say I live in Seattle, and I don't know what the issue is. Say the issue is detention centers. These are whites who are interested in doing anti-racist work, but it's not just about sitting in a room and being like, oh my God, you know, I did this, or my family. It's not that. You actually have to do work. So you actually have to go into communities of color and work with them to pass some kind, whatever policy goal, whatever it is. So it's an active kind of thing. So those kinds of things are happening. I hope that helped.
I'm talking about sensitizing them.
Well,
more than
if I can really quickly, I think
sensitizing.
part of the issue is that, number one, it's not our responsibility. I think it's real important for white people to recognize that their humanity is at stake right now. Our lives are at stake, but how will history record their response to these atrocities? I think that's the question, and there are a significant number, you're right, there's a significant number of white organizations who are actually attempting to do that work, and you're correct. The reporting on that is absolutely abysmal. Absolutely abysmal, but it exists. And I think that the urgency to organize our communities does not afford us the luxury to step outside and try to convince some white folks to be kind to us.
I wanted to add and really echo those sentiments, because even within the body of the city council and the way we discuss this, it's predominantly African American men who this is impacting, and I would prefer to spend my time making sure that every young person, every black man throughout the city and beyond understands the impact and the seriousness of this, and that should be the first body of individuals that are organized and that are working collaboratively to make that happen. And I would say, as a council member, one of the challenges that I do have is that in this district alone, in the 35th Council District, I am shocked and amazed at just how segregated this community is. And it's one of those things where I go from one event to the next event to the next event, and it is like night and day. It's like I've gotten on a plane, and right? It's like I've gotten on a plane and traveled to the other side of the country, and there's just a whole different set of people. And we travel in these silos, and the only time you really see the diversity is when we're walking in the street to our different destinations. But when you get from place to place, whether it's a restaurant, a clothing store, a tree lighting ceremony, a TA meeting, a Kwanzaa celebration, a fashion show, I mean, the beauty of this place is that you could experience all of this and you could meet all of these people, but we choose not to, and we choose to remain in our own comfortable situations that really takes away from what could be so dynamic and powerful about this district.
Well, I urge you to invite your colleague in government, Representative Peter King, along on those walks. Maybe he'll get an education as well. So we're closing in on our last 10 minutes. So I know calm down. You're going to get to your question, I promise. So I'm going to ask everyone to really keep it tight so we can have as much of the dialogue as we can here. And of course, we'll continue. But Dred.
Oh, okay, I'm Dred Scott. I'm from Fort Greene. We said to say where we're from. And I mean, this entire system is guilty as hell. One of the chants on the streets is indict, convict, send those killer cops to jail. This whole damn system is guilty as hell. And I think that anger that's on the streets, there's going to be a whole week of protests that's happening, that's being organized right now. There's another town hall meeting of activists by the Stop Mass Incarceration Network. And I think the thing of like talking about these long-term solutions, et cetera, the reason we're even having this conversation is the people in Ferguson stood up They were defiant as hell.
That's
and
right.
we need to be in the streets, and we need to, I want you guys to, how are you going to support that instead of saying, well, we got to shift and pivot to all this other stuff? The only reason we're having these conversations is people who put their bodies on the line, they shut down the West Side Highway, the FDR, and we need to be in the streets, and we need to support those movements. And I think really learn from that. This was a, Michelle Alexander broke it down. She said, first there was slavery, then there was the Jim Crow, now there's the new Jim Crow. And we need to actually not be like looking at, I know you're trying to keep this short, but I'm sorry. This situation deserves actually going up into the face of this, and I really want you guys to actually speak to getting people out the next week and staying angry and not putting up with this bullshit of trying to actually calm things down and look at voters and talking about white people. Because the white people are actually out. There are a lot of white people that are out now too. So please support that.
I think that's a statement in itself. Let's just go right to you.
First, I can not ever attend, Roger, one of your performances without thanking you for a lifetime of devoting your art and your craft to the struggle. When we talk about a cultural warrior, that's a cultural warrior. I thank Councilmember, I'm very thankful for your comments about the projects. I think we have to stand clear on it's not just an issue of police brutality. There's a broader context. We're sitting here today talking about an agenda. At the same time, there's another agenda that is at work. There is legislation about to be considered by your governor to make the issue of police discipline a matter of contractual discussion. Who's going to decide who acts when the police disact? A police union discussion and bargaining? The lives of black people are not bargaining issues. Frederick Douglass said, agitate, agitate, agitate.
You've all been agitated. Thank you. Please, hurry.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for having this. This is awesome. My name is Edgar Tyson. I'm an associate professor at Fordham University, Graduate School of Social Services. Wow, that was long, but listen. This is so real. Excuse my language. I don't think anybody cursed yet today, did they?
Come on, keep it tight, keep it clean.
We need to change policies.
Thank you.
That's what. All right? Because we focus on these people and the problem remains the same. That's all I'm saying. And young folks want to help change policies. Yeah. But older folks need to stop dancing around each other and talking about each other as people, but policies need to change. All right?
Thank you.
Yeah, racialized policing isn't just about brutality.
Yeah.
It's about mass criminalization. We got to get the cops out of the schools. We got to get the cops from out of the drug business. We got to get the cops, we got to come up with alternatives to using the police to deal with every little problem. And those are the real policy changes. We got to get them to quit harassing the homeless people. We got them to quit responding to emotionally disturbed people and shooting them instead of giving them care. We need civilian mental health care workers doing that work, not police.
I just want to add, too, that one of the things that we're seeing is that while simultaneously and from an elected position is that all of these dynamics are happening around us, but at the same time, people of color are being displaced and they are being evicted from their homes. We have the hugest challenge in terms of what's going to happen in Albany with our rent laws. And while all of this is happening, people of color are being removed from their community, I say, either by police car, a Hertz, or a U-Haul. People are being moved out massively all throughout New York City. And so while we're recognizing this, we're recognizing that our school system, we have one of the most segregated school systems in the country. And that is yielding the result of the ignorance that people have of one another's culture, that they've never been introduced, had to sit down, had a conversation, read about. They know nothing about one another. And then they're forced to be in these very critical and real life-changing situations with a group of people that they know nothing about. And so there's a lot that needs to be happened, and it's policy and it's legislation, but there are so many other issues that have to get addressed while we're dealing with what's happening with our police department, because the police department and the shootings in the prison industrial complex system are only the end result of layers and foundations of inequalities that are happening all throughout our entire system.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think that we all recognize this isn't happening in a vacuum, and I want to take that opportunity to invite you guys back and bring a friend for our next town hall, which is going to be on the subject of gentrification through a very Brooklyn-specific lens. So that's going to be in the latter half of January. So please do be checking us out at bricartsmedia.org for the exact date of that town hall on gentrification, and come back. And you're going to be our last question.
All right. This was a wonderful presentation by Roger and town hall meeting. I'd like to ask about art and culture, factoring into moving forward the movement, and so to say. Roger was in a very powerful film, Do the Right Thing, with parallels what's happening nowadays. Chuck D, Fight the Power, hip hop. Where does hip hop factor in? Can it factor in to moving the movement forward? Panelists.
You want to start with that, Roger? You were addressed specifically.
Well, yeah, we did a film 25 years ago called Do the Right Thing. It was a piece of fiction, allegedly, but it was inspired by the police murder of a young man by the name of Michael Stewart, who was put into a chokehold that was so brutal that his eyeballs popped out of his skull. And in order to cover their tracks, the police bleached his eyeballs and replaced them into his eye sockets. We see a similar maneuver put on Mr. Garner that was put on a fictitious character by the name of Radio Raheem. And we mourned Radio Raheem in fiction, and we mourn Eric Garner as well in all too real life and death. Hip-hop is part of an ongoing tradition, an ongoing oral tradition, an ongoing struggle. 50 years ago, there was a native of Brooklyn by the name of Max Roach who did a beautiful piece of work entitled Freedom Now, Sweet. And that is the, I think, achievement to which all art should aspire. One that works, first of all, as a brilliant piece of art, of music, of orchestration, of performance. And then one which speaks to the current dilemma that was addressed so beautifully and poignantly by people like Paul Robeson, Ruby Dee, R.C. Davis, with whom I had the great privilege of working. This is what all artists, I think, should aspire. But first, we have to make good work. And I've been very privileged to have been in collaboration with the brother to my left-hand side, Mr. Mark Anthony Thompson. His work has always been on point, and our collaboration has always been motivated by the tradition from which we come. And that tradition in our respect is Bodie, Oklahoma, all-black town, Panama, Colon, which is where Mark Anthony's folks are from, and Portsmouth, Virginia, which is where my dad, my late father, is from, and Charleston, South Carolina, where my mom is from. So we come from a very rich tradition of struggle, and I think that we are trying to honor our antecedents through the work that we do. And I know that you all are engaged in that movement as well. So we welcome your continuing collaboration in this process, on stage, off stage, in the street, Perhaps we should walk out of this theater this afternoon after we put our shoes on and make some sort of statement on some sort of intersection. Shahir Rasul, stand up, brother. I think that this brother's going to lead the procession, as he has led the procession at the African burial ground in Lower Manhattan. And I think you could do that, couldn't you? I think I can do that. You could lead that tour. Okay. Before we do that, you know, we've been throwing out a little benediction by a young poet from Compton, California, who wrote a poem and put it to music. The poem is called Swimming Pools, and we always thought that it was appropriate that we play at the conclusion of this performance this remarkable piece by this remarkable young artist by the name of Kendrick Lamar. And we talk about the enabling power, the glory, the majesty of this hip-hop work and this hip-hop generation. Mark Anthony Thompson has put it in his inimitable mix, and as we move out and follow Rasul into the streets of Brooklyn, let's take a little meditation and listen to the Mark Anthony Thompson Chocolate Genius mix of Kendrick Lamar's Swimming Pools. You got it up there, Kirk?
Pass out.
Turn it up.
Sit down. Stand up. Pass out. Wake up. Sit down. Stand up.
Again, I'd like to thank Roger Gunnar Smith,
Wake up.
Mark Anthony Thompson,
Sit down.
Lumumba Bandele, City Council Member Lori Cumbo, Alex Vitale, and Kari Thompson. Thank you all for being here.